Good morning.
Good morning, Phil. Cold this morning.
It is cold and
Yes.
nasty.
Yeah. Yes, it is. No groundhog sorry shadows. We're going to have 6 more weeks of it, they say.
I thought when we got a new groundhog, we'd do that, didn't we?
Yeah.
Today's study, we're still looking at Joseph, and we're looking at the pitfalls of injustice.
Yeah.
Joseph suffered a lot of them.
He sure did, didn't he?
He had some bad luck.
Yeah, well, yes, he did.
Have you ever had a streak like that where you just seemed to not be able to win everything? I know you did because you were farming for a
Yeah.
while.
You lay there at night and you hear the thunder in the distance, but it never does get to you. At night after night after night, I had a bad year like that early on.
Yeah.
And tough.
Joseph was in such a way. Rocky Balboa said, "It's not how hard you can get hit, but it's
Not how hard you hit.
how hard you hit, but how hard you can get hit and still keep going,
Still keep going.
still keep going." And we're going to look at some perseverance. And that's one of the traits that I think God wants us to have as Christians, is to have some perseverance. Everybody runs through rough patches. You get bad news from a doctor, or, we both had that.
Yeah.
Maybe you lose a loved one, and then something else happens. You wreck your car, you're going through a divorce, and then wreck your car, or you have a financial loss. And,
A new station alert has arrived.
My dad and 2 grandfathers died within about 4 years of each other, back when I was a teenager. Not even a teenager, 11, 12 years old, 13 years old. That was a rough spot, but it's a distant memory now, and you go through it, and you have other people step up and help you. But poor Joseph didn't have anybody, Phil.
but the Lord sent him through.
But the Lord, it's all he needed, wasn't it?
The Lord is always there to see us through. That doesn't mean we're not going to have to go through it.
That's right.
In this instance, he has been put in jail for a crime he didn't commit, being accused of raping or attempting to rape Potiphar's wife.
Right.
And Potiphar had him thrown in prison, but he didn't have him killed.
That's Joseph's second shot at being killed, right?
Yeah.
I mean, his brothers were going to kill him. They wanted to kill him, and then they said, Judah said, let's sell him. And then Potiphar could have easily had Joseph killed, I think, for that crime.
Well, sure.
No question about it, but go ahead.
He had every opportunity to go on and kill him, and justification during the laws that were in place at that time.
Right.
That's what they would do with him, especially a slave. Wouldn't think twice about it.
He was a possession anyway.
We're going to look at the attitude that Joseph had. This series of scriptures is good stuff for us.
Yeah.
Because it shows us why we should have that perseverance and that fortitude under pressure, just to get on with it. Let's look at it.
Okay, in Genesis chapter 39, verses 21 through 23 first, let me read those. He says, but the Lord was with Joseph. Now he's talking about Joseph when he's in prison now. Even in the king's prison, which was probably one of the worst, where the king put all of his prisoners. He said, but the Lord was with Joseph and extended kindness to him. He granted him favor with the prison warden. The warden put all the prisoners who were in the prison under Joseph's authority, and he was responsible for everything that was done there. The warden did not bother with anything under Joseph's authority because the Lord was with him, and the Lord made everything that he did successful. Once again, Joseph's in this situation, bad situation, that's no fault of his own, just like when his brothers had him sold into slavery. But look at his attitude. The Lord was pleased with Joseph and extended kindness to him. Whatever they asked Joseph to do, Joseph did it. And he did it to the best of his ability. He didn't complain, he didn't gripe. We would say, woe is me, oh my gosh, what have I done to deserve this? We would have been mad at everybody in the picture, right?
We tend to wallow in self-pity, don't we?
He could have been angry still at Potiphar for getting him there, for Potiphar's wife for sure, for accusing him of something he didn't do. He could have even been angry with God. Don't we sometimes get angry with God for the situations we find ourselves in? Why, God? Why did this happen to me? What have I done to deserve this? But he didn't. He didn't have any of those feelings at all. Those verses, Phil, are very similar to those in chapter 39, earlier in chapter 39, that described Joseph's relationship with Potiphar. Remember, it said Potiphar turned everything over to Joseph, including what's in the house, what's out of the house. I think the final word there was, Potiphar, the only thing Potiphar worried about was what he ate, right?
That was it.
And what does this say here? The warden did not bother with anything under Joseph's authority. The warden, once again, saw that God was with Joseph. Now, they didn't worship, as we said before, they didn't worship the same God that Joseph did, but they could tell that he was different. Someone was looking after him. And he just turned everything over to him. Now, wasn't that a big step for that warden?
Well, yeah.
I mean, what was a warden responsible for in that day and time? And what happened if something happened?
Well, they killed him.
If a prisoner escaped, I think I've read this somewhere, they had to take the sentence of the prisoner that escaped. And if it was death, they killed him.
Yeah.
The warden, he could definitely see something in Joseph enough to trust him with his own very life, Do we sometimes let our circumstances get us down?
Sure. Sure, everybody goes through hills and valleys.
But if we're a believer, if we're a Christian, as the writer says, just as the Lord was a warrior for Joseph, and he fights for us too. But as you said earlier, that doesn't mean, Phil, that we're going to pray, God, just take this away from me, and tomorrow everything's going to be sunny and rosy, right? We still got to go through that valley to get to the other side.
God does things. He prepares us for things down the road, but we don't even realize He's doing it. I think it's what He's doing with Joseph.
He's teaching Joseph some lessons. He's also preparing the way for his people, the Hebrew people, because God knows exactly what's going to happen 100 years from now, or 400 years from now, probably, when Moses comes into town. God knows that's going to happen. And he's preparing Joseph to prepare the Egyptians to accept the Hebrew nation at this point in time. All this is in God's plan, but boy, sometimes we wonder why we have to walk through it. And Joseph could have easily said, why in the world are you doing this to me? Why? Paul was guided with the same principle that we see Joseph exhibiting here. In Philippians 4:11, what does Paul say? He says, I have learned to be content in whatever circumstance I find myself. That's a paraphrase of what Paul said. Paul had been in prison, been beaten. He'd almost been killed 2 or 3 times. He escaped with his life. And he said, it doesn't matter. I'm content where I am. If I'm hungry, fine. If I'm cold, fine. I'm just content with where God has put me at this particular time. Wouldn't it be great to have that assurance every minute of every day of every hour of every day in our lives?
But we don't.
We don't. We go up and down. Yeah. So we're set stage here. Joseph's in prison because something he didn't do. The warden has given him all the authority, and the warden says doesn't worry about anything.
He seems like he's making the best out of a bad situation.
Yes.
In the next verses, it says, the captain of the guards assigned Joseph to them as their personal attendant, and they were in custody for some time. The king of Egypt's cupbearer and baker, who were confined in the prison, each had a dream. Both had a dream on the same night.
Yeah.
And each dream had its own meaning. When Joseph came to him in the morning, he saw that they looked distraught. So he asked Pharaoh's officers who were in custody with him in his master's house, "Why do you look so sad today?" "We had dreams," they said to him, "but there's no one to interpret them." Then Joseph said to him, "Don't interpretations belong to God? Tell me your dreams." How do you think Joseph was able to keep his attitudes in check? You think he didn't have thoughts of breaking out or, I'm wronged here? He had some bad thoughts, had to.
And he sure didn't, he cared about these guys, right?
Yeah.
It looked, if you have a bad attitude when you get up in the morning, someone walks in the room and starts grumbling about something, what's the first thing you tell them? I don't want to hear it.
Yeah.
Don't bother me if your problem. I got a bigger problem you ever thought about having. Don't worry me about it.
But Joseph, he decides to concentrate on the responsibility that was given to him and have an outward focus. When he walked in this room here with these guys, he sees them every day. And whether they're there for a legitimate reason or not, he doesn't give air to that, he doesn't, well, you ought to have seen what happened to me.
These old guys are in bad shape.
They were, and he realized that. But he didn't wallow in that self-pity, he just didn't wallow. He might have been given a good position, but he's still in prison.
He wasn't at home with his family.
And he might have had authority over prisoners. Now, J.R., I've worked with inmates, and they're not all ones you want to have authority over.
Oh, that's probably true.
You take some back.
Yeah.
It's the same way with him. I'm sure he had some of these guys were terrible. But yet he went on and continued to do his jobs there and do them well, and he turns over everything to him. And then he comes in and he had a legitimate concern for others. I think that's a good way to put it. And God has that in our hearts with the Holy Spirit. When we see somebody who's downtrodden or going through a hard time, we have compassion on them.
And God puts those people in our lives, right?
He puts them in our path.
Every day. Puts people in our life, in our path.
But they both have a dream, and each dream has a meaning. But he looked at them and said, "Why are you so sad today?" He could see it on their faces. You ever see somebody say, "Oh, I'm fine," but yet something is tearing them up. And it happens all the time. And you don't want to be nosy, you don't want to pry.
Right.
But he did inquire. It's a responsibility to us to inquire. And then they tell him about these dreams. Now, dreams in that day and time were meant to be, or perceived to be, a message from God.
A message from God.
And so if they didn't understand them when they had them, there were people who were dream interpreters.
Right.
And you would take that message that you received from God in your dream, and you would go to a dream interpreter.
There wasn't any of them in prison, evidently.
Evidently not. But there was one.
Yeah.
Now, we know that Joseph had dreams earlier. And when he interpreted the dream that his brothers would bow down to him, and that his father would bow down to him, how'd that go over? When he interpreted that dream, I don't know if I'd have interpreted another one.
I might have kept that to myself.
Well, and he surely had to be hesitant to interpret these guys' dreams. The other thing I wondered about here, it says the captain of the guards had assigned Joseph. This is the captain of the guards at the prison. Now, Potiphar was captain of the guards of the Pharaoh.
Pharaoh's, yeah.
Do you think those captains knew each other?
They might have, because this was a prison for the king, as we said earlier.
That's right.
They might have known each other.
I'd say they knew each
They might
other.
have heard about this guy
And
named
I'd
Joseph.
say old Potiphar said, he's a great guy. He could do anything.
But why didn't, okay, well,
But
you could always ask, why didn't Potiphar kill him? Potiphar might have known that, this is backing up a little bit, but Potiphar might have had an idea of what his wife did.
yeah.
Yeah, that probably wasn't the first time that had been tried.
Well, he may have known her flirtatious ways.
Yeah.
Hadn't he?
Or, as we see in other cases, the Lord might have said, put this in Potiphar's mind, you don't need to kill this guy. Put him in prison.
Yeah.
The Lord could have indirectly directed Potiphar to do what he did. The Lord uses whoever he wants and however he wants them. Anyway, let's back it up, sorry.
The chief cupbearer, he was the one that kept the king from getting poisoned.
Right.
And so he was an important man.
Yes.
Now, these guys are there for a reason. We don't really know if they knew things that went on in the king's court. Mm-hmm. Did they speak out of turn? Did they not catch some bad food and the king got sick? We don't know. Mm-hmm. It doesn't really say. But for whatever reason, they've been thrown in prison.
Yeah.
And they had to be wondering about their future. When they lay down at night, oftentimes when we lay down at night and we have something on our mind, we'll dream about it.
Yeah.
Now you dream.
I dream all the time. I'd have to have an interpreter follow me around.
You have to hire one full time.
Follow one full time, that's right.
I don't dream like that. But, it is hard to turn off your mind sometimes when you go to sleep. But he had serious concern about these two guys when he come in and talked to them. And they were perplexed over these dreams. They were just tore up. They thought that God was sending a message to them, and they had no idea what it was. Mm-hmm. So Joseph starts talking about his God here. Now this is the first time that we really see him talking about the Lord, isn't it? Mm-hmm. Don't these interpretations belong to God?
And they would have thought that. They believed that whoever they went to had a calling from God to interpret dreams, so they would have known what he was talking about.
But the source of the message was from God.
Yes.
And they believed that, the cupbearer and the baker. Right. They both believed that.
Yeah.
So they just had to count on somebody else.
Yeah.
So Joseph, he asked them to share them with him. And the next verses, well, there's a section of verses here where Joseph goes on and tells about the dream. You want to go through that?
Yeah, I do. I don't care. You can. I don't care.
But, he tells the cupbearer, that your dream means that in 3 days you're going to be restored to your position.
Right.
He had a dream that, over this time that he couldn't figure out. And then the other guy, he had a very similar dream, but it was different.
Yeah.
He said, you're not going to be restored to your position.
You're going to be hung impaled on a stick or whatever. Yeah.
So the dreams were totally different interpretations, even though they sounded somewhat similar.
Yeah. And because the dream of the cupbearer was a good dream, what did Joseph ask him to do? He said, remember me when you go to the king, remember what I've told you. When this happens and comes to fruition, remember what I told you. And I'm not here because I did anything wrong.
These next verses, they show us that we shouldn't be discouraged by delays.
Yeah. Because there's several.
He's thinking, man, I got a shot here. Yeah. Joseph's thinking he's going to have a favorable outcome, and he's going to be back in the Pharaoh's court.
Yep.
And I've got a shot to get out.
Yeah.
Let's see how it works out.
Yeah. Let's see what it says in chapter 40, verses 20 through 23. Joseph told him within 3 days this would happen. On the third day, which was Pharaoh's birthday, he gave a feast for all of his servants. He elevated the chief cupbearer and chief baker among his servants. So he brought them back into the palace, castle, whatever. Pharaoh restored the chief cupbearer to his position of cupbearer, and he placed a cup in Pharaoh's hand. But Pharaoh hanged the chief baker just as Joseph had explained to them. Yet the chief cupbearer did not remember Joseph. He forgot him. As we said, the cupbearer, Joseph asked the cupbearer, remember me when you get back to the palace, because I've interpreted this dream for you and it's going to happen. Well, you tell the king what I did for you. So, we see now the dreams have come true 3 days later, just like Joseph said. The cupbearer's been restored, the baker's been killed. So, good ending, right? As soon as the cupbearer went back, he said, I know a guy that interpreted this dream exactly like it happened. And he's a good man. He took care of us while we were in prison. You need to get him out of prison.
He didn't do that.
What did it say? He forgot him.
He forgot him.
He forgot Joseph. As soon as he got back in his position, Joseph never came to his mind again. For a long time, we see that. Joseph remained in prison probably for a couple of years before he got out.
You think he was so distraught and tore up that his condition was the only thing on his mind?
The cupbearer?
Yeah.
He's tickled death. He got his head on his shoulder.
That's right. And that's the way we do.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
We get so self-focused, look so inward at the troubles that we're having. You don't have to do nothing but glance up and find somebody that's got it worse than you do.
Exactly.
And I don't care what's going on with you.
It doesn't matter, does it?
No. God will show them to you.
I was thinking coming down here this morning, Phil, why should we ever be discouraged or feel like an injustice has happened to us when we know what's going to happen to us when we die? This world is great. I love living in the time we're living now and seeing our grandkids and so forth and so on. We're going to forget about that. When we get in the presence of God, just like this cupbearer forgot about old Joseph, we're going to be so focused on God and His glory and Christ and all those saints that are there that I think this world's going to be gone out of our mind.
What if the chief baker was innocent?
He could have been. The writer seems to think that maybe they knew of a plot and maybe one of them was in on the other one. He didn't know which one, so we put them both in prison. Maybe. I don't know. We don't know why they were there, but it could have been that. He could have been innocent, just like Joseph is innocent.
He could have very well. But if he was innocent, if he is a Christian and he is an innocent man and he's put to death, he still wins.
That's right. That's
He
right.
still wins.
That's right. That's
You have eternal life in heaven,
Yep.
you still win.
But
That might be hard to see under the circumstances that he was in.
But how can you go through this life, Phil, without having that hope?
Well, there's people that do.
But people do. I mean, there's more people do than don't. But it's difficult for me to understand why people choose that or how people choose that, knowing the outcome. And I don't see how they can make it. And a lot of times they don't make it through things. They lose it, and everything falls apart for them. But
How do you think Joseph feels now?
he's about as low as he's been since he's thrown in the pit.
Here's this guy, he interprets his dream. Once again, does he benefit from interpreting that dream?
No, he doesn't.
Not right now, does he?
Right now, he doesn't. No.
He forgets about him, and there's no way for Joseph to reach out to him.
No.
There's just no way for him to do it.
Joseph's right back where he was when he was in, a little bit better off than when he was in the pit. At least he probably gets something to eat here, but he's not any better off than he was then.
I think it tells us too that, you know, we're going to be mistreated. We're going to have things that aren't going to go our way. Sometimes we may be accused of something and be innocent. Sometimes we may be accused of something and be guilty and deserve the consequences of it.
Punishment.
But whatever, we're of Christian faith, the Lord's going to be with us through it. And He'll speak to us through it. He'll guide us through it. Yeah.
Joseph continued to trust God through these trials, just like Phil, we should do in our times of trials and when we face trials today. And as you said, we're all going to face trials, but he trusted God just like he did before, just like we should do in our lives today.
He had patience, didn't he?
Yep. He was in prison 2 more years. I think we're going to see the story of him getting out in next week's lesson.
And we find that same cupbearer, he said, well, wait a minute. Now, I remember this guy.
Yep.
This dude in prison down here.
Yep. He told me a dream, told him my dream, and it came out exactly like he said it was.
It's funny, because this guy was the guy that was worried about himself.
Yeah.
You know, otherwise he would have remembered Joseph when he went out. He was worried about himself. And when the Pharaoh later on, when he has his dream and can't get it interpreted, he thinks he'll get a point here.
Still think this.
He sure is. And so he said, I remember this dude back in prison.
Yeah.
This boxing thing, you know, with we all get things that are thrown at us that we don't desire, and take the punches and keep rolling. Keep your outward focus. Keep looking down the road at what God is trying to tell you. All these things too, as we look at them, they're preparing Joseph for a greater task.
Exactly right.
Later on.
He can't imagine how big that task is.
Where his place is going to be in the kingdom.
No.
Not sitting down in prison.
But he doesn't say, woe is me, I'm sitting over in the corner and not doing anything. He continues to do what they ask him to do and has
Perseverance.
Yeah.
Perseverance and patience. It's good stuff.
Phil, under Live It Out, there's a statement made, I'm sure it's in yours too, under this, there's 3 things that tell us to do. We should trust God's time, and you talked about that. Patience is something we don't have, most of us don't have. I'm very impatient. But sometimes, I've heard about a lady back in the fall, I guess, who prayed for her husband for 53 years before he became a Christian. Now, that's patience. That's trusting God, and he should continue to pray, and after 53 years, he made profession of faith. It says it's for us to get to work. God honors hard work done with a joyful heart. You've had all kinds of employees. I had all kinds of employees. You had some, Phil, that you didn't want to ask them how they were doing, did you? Because you knew it was going to be a 2-hour story about how well it was made. You had others that came in and they were glad to be there. They enjoyed what they were doing, and they always had a joyful attitude. The writer says here, I don't know that I've ever thought of this, the greatest constant witness of the Christian life is how we go about our work. Now that might be true, Phil, because your employees don't see you at night. They see you at 8 hours or 10 hours a day. And if you have a constant attitude of, I'm glad to be here, I'm going to do the job the best I can, I'm going to do whatever they ask me to do, then they see that. And if they know you're a Christian, they say, well, that's probably the reason he does that, because of the life he has, the relationship he has with God.
I found that when you're leading people, that you lead them to lead themselves.
Yeah.
You help them find themselves, and also try to realize where they are and where they come from. And I think Joseph had that same type of thing going on, because he would ask questions, why are you so distraught?
Yeah.
He observed people. I think a good leader observes and watches and shows genuine compassion.
Yeah.
They'll have compassion.
In Philippians 2:14, another thing Paul said was, do everything without grumbling or arguing. Well, we like to grumble sometimes, don't we?
Yeah, but
And argue. Why are we going to do that? We shouldn't do that. And then the last one says is to make a difference. And you talked about this just a few minutes ago. When you encounter injustice or difficulty, don't turn your attention toward yourself. Go out and find somebody that's worse off than you are, that is having a rougher time than you are, and ask God how you can help them.
Yeah.
Get your attention off of yourself and onto someone else that's hurting worse.
yeah, you don't have to look far.
Yeah.
Thank you for joining us. We appreciate you tuning in with us.
Continue the story of Joseph next week.
More next week. So
Yeah.
we'll see you.
Bye.